high atop the pastoral center of the Diocese of Camden, you're listening to Talking Catholic.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Talking Catholic. It's Kari, Janisse here. We are in our first week of Lent, so I guess technically when this airs will be the start of the second week of Lent. And we are here, I am here with my good friend, Mike Walsh. So we are here together.
Except we're not. The first time in weeks, we're not. It's painful. You can probably tell from the audio, folks. This is another Zoom call. We're recording this as South Jersey got hit by a massive ice storm today. So we thought it best that we not just South
Jersey, like half of the U.S.
Well, that's
it just
true.
Came up from Texas and
the problem is that we've had a lot of snow this winter, which for me is great. I love it. The more weight, the better in my regards and my concerns. But we haven't had like a really good snowfall. They've all been ice falls mixed with snow. So earlier today, I was out shoveling snow with my son, and the one upside was even though it was icy today, it was the first time I could use the snowblower and not have it jam up on me. So I was very, very happy about that. But
that's
the little
fun.
Victories, Kari.
I didn't step outside once. I had my husband do the drive, as he always does. And when it was nice a couple of weweeks ago, that snowfall, and we got so much, and it was like that great packing snow. I was outside with my son, John Paul. We had a blast. No, we made a huge Olaf snowman. He was so excited because it wasn't just a snowman. We made Olaf, and it was Olaf. It looked great. I was super psyched.
Awesome. I would expect nothing less from someone as graphically oriented as you to do a proper Olaf in your backyard.
My art major coming out and it had to be proper. Like I even went as far as like looking at the style of twigs that made up his arms and his hair and like sought out twigs that looked that way. So it's all about the details, Mike.
I've heard that. So, you mentioned it. We're starting the second week of Lent. I want to ask you, how was your Ash Wednesday, your first week of Lent?
Oh, it was nice. It was, a little different as it was for all of us. It didn't really like the idea of the ashes bothered me going in the hair. We talked about this on the prior podcast just because it was
That's
different.
Right.
But like, and when it actually happened, I was like, this is fine. Actually, I was watching the Eucharistic ministers and we had Father Matt as one deacon John Casey, and then two Eucharistic ministers distributing the ashes. And I sought out which on my side was sprinkling less. And I went to them. Truth be told. But outside of that, I went to two other services because I had to live stream them.
Yeah.
And I did not go up for extra ashes. If it was on my forehead, I would. I was just like, I got mine already. So there's my Ash Wednesday experience.
I was live. The bishop had Ash Wednesday Mass at the cathedral, Bishop Sullivan, and at the cathedral in Camden, and so it was great. It was as usual. The Catholic Church was giving something away for free, so everybody showed up. It was the fullest I have seen a church in almost a year now. But it was beautiful, and everybody was socially distanced. Everybody had their mask on, and everything was safe. But it was great to see the church filled as much as it was. But I was enjoying watching. Nobody seemed to blink an eye with the sprinkling of the ashes on the top of the head. It did make me wonder, though. The only time I really kind of like thought to myself, well, this is peculiar, was when bald guys went up.
I did notice that.
They were the only ones who kind of got away with almost a cross on their heads, because what would happen is that they would sprinkle, and then I think just because whenever you feel something on your head, you kind of brush it. Every single one of them, by the time they left Mass, had a line down the middle of their head from where they had moved it. So they got at least a column of the cross. They got the transept of the cross. But I actually, as usual, when I live stream these things, I never get a chance to do communion because I'm so busy with stuff. And we were doing a lot of kind of cool shots with the live stream stuff this time. And then I realized, man, I didn't even get up to get my ashes. So fortunately, the rector of the cathedral took pity on me and gave me some ashes right before I left. So
because they don't have to be done in the context of Mass either, so you can get them.
Yeah. Well, the truth of the matter is they don't even need to be done. Well, in a normal circumstance, they don't even need to be done by a Eucharistic minister. Like my colleagues were there. I thought about it later. I said, hey, because they had already done the group blessing. And that's kind of the key to the whole thing. And since they weren't doing individual blessings, they were doing group blessings. I had already been blessed. I just needed someone to that. I could have had one of my colleagues dip into the ashes and put it on my head. my fear was that they would have entirely too much fun with that. I was like,
yeah,
I don't need my staff dumping the ashes in.
But, you'll be like from the Bible where they sat in their ash and talked
yes.
about and reflected on their sin. That would have been you on Ash Wednesday, like literally sitting in the ash.
But we've begun Lent, and it's very good.
Yeah.
And for anyone who hasn't checked out our Talking Catholic stuff, or the stuff certainly within our diocese, I think all the dioceses are doing a lot of online content, just kind of, not because of any COVID reason, just because we've all gotten very good at it. So we're creating all this online stuff. So check out your local diocese Facebook page and YouTube page and websites, because I guarantee you they're putting up a lot of interesting content right now, specific to Lent, which we are as well. So feel free to check out Camden Diocese on Facebook. It's just like that, Camden Diocese on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and YouTube. Certainly check out your local parishes. But Kari, Lent is a time that typically in the Lenten opportunities, we bring new people into the church.
Yeah.
And you've invited someone on the podcast tonight that did something like that was a convert to our faith.
That is true. Yes.
You want to introduce him and give him his backstory?
Yes, I have on my friend who I've met through my parish, which is Our Lady of Peace Parish in Williamstown. I have my friend, Dr. Daniel Costa, or Dr. Dan Costa. He is a pediatrician locally in our area of South Jersey, and a good friend of mine, a father of 5, and as you mentioned, Mike, a convert to the faith. So we welcome Dr. Dan, or as we're going to go forward, just calling him Dan, to the podcast.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, you're welcome. So good to have you on. And I'm so thankful that you could be on, because I know your evenings are probably precious with putting the kids to bed right now and doing a lot of other things, just regrouping from the day of work. And did you work today? Because it was snowy. Did you still have to go in as?
Today is my day off. So
nice. Oh, so this worked out kind of nicely then to be able to work this in at the end of the day. Well, that's great. So thank you, though, for taking the time to be with us. And if you want to just...
You bailed me out of bedtime, so bedtime.
Hey, all right.
Kari, I'm curious, how did Dan cross your path? I know everybody at your parish crosses your path at some point, but everyone. But how did Dan get on your radar?
Sure. So there was like a kind of formal meeting back a few years ago. I was running family retreats at our parish, and Dan's family, his sister-in-law is a part of our parish and had introduced his family to our parish when they moved back locally to the area. And you kind of hear about that throughout his story about coming back to the South Jersey area. But I remember his sister-in-law, her name is Alicia. She said, "Can my brother-in-law and sister come on the family retreat with their kids?" I was like, "Yeah, of course, that'd be great to." And she was saying how they were moving back to the area and he was going to be starting his residency. So I met him and his younger family. At the time, there was less kids and they were all younger. This was about 5-6 years ago, I guess, and at this family retreat. But I was helping run the retreat, and it's like one of those where you're like in a million places and doing a lot of different things. And we never actually sat down and talked until more recently. Actually, speaking of all the live streams and such, we can thank Dan for our live streams looking really nice, because he's the one that started helping me out with them and introduced me to the app we use, Switcher Studio, which makes them look really nice. I know you've commented on them, Mike. So it was when I was doing the live streams. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I did not know that we can thank Dan for that. Dan,
yes.
Many thanks, because I know Kari was pulling her hair out in the early stages, and then later on I see that she has one of the best, I almost say it rivals the diocese with its quality, and she does it a lot more frequently than we do. So thank you for that. It's one of the best looking live streams in our diocese.
Sure. Yeah, I'm glad it looks that way.
Yeah, it took a little bit to get there, but it's a lot of thanks to Dan. So he had seen me live streaming multiple masses in the weekend when churches first started opening up. And that is because our live stream not only serves for those at home, but it serves for our church overflow with social distancing. So I had to do a lot of masses in the beginning until we knew what the numbers were going to kind of pan out to be. And so he was graciously enough to come up to me after mass one day and have a conversation with me and ask me if I needed help. And I was like, "Yes, I do. Please help." And he's been great ever since. So, and that just was the start of our friendship, and started to get to know his wife more and see her mass and talk with her and him, and just develop a friendship over the last 6, 7, 8 months, however long it's been since June. So yeah, so that's really since then that we've gotten to know each other better and more details about each other's lives, and including his great story of conversion into our Catholic faith.
So let's talk about that, Dan. What, growing up, what was your family life like? What was your spiritual life like back in the day?
Sure. Yeah. So I actually grew up in Brazil initially. I moved to the US when I was around like 7 or 8. But I grew up Episcopalian. My uncle, who is American, came to Brazil on a mission quite a few years before I was born, and met my aunt, and he became an Episcopalian pastor down there, had a parish and so forth. So I grew up within that environment. He eventually separated from the Episcopalian church and kind of went off on his own in more of like a Bible kind of church. And so those are the years that I really remember. I remember some of the Episcopalian years, but then more of the Bible church, very charismatic and so forth. So I grew up in that environment. Within that environment, I laugh now, but we were essentially taught that the Catholic Church was, I want to be careful with the words that I use now that, this is going to be on a podcast, but this is a biblical thing. But, the W of Babylon, the abomination. I just didn't want to use that particular word there, but, essentially the epitome of all evil and the seed of the Antichrist was exactly what I was brought up to believe.
Wow.
They used to teach me that behind every candle, there was a demon. And that praying to statues was praying to demons also. And I mean, you have to understand a little bit, in Brazil, there's imported from Africa, this cult that's very occult, Macumba, which is a kind of a worship that's very mixed. And they take Catholic statues and they offer foods to it, light candles in front of it. So a lot of Protestants in Brazil get this impression that Catholics do the same and we worship statues. So this is the environment that I grew up in. We eventually moved to the US. My parents had a theater company that would tour throughout Brazil, and they wanted to expand. So they came to the US and performed down at the Lincoln Center for a little bit and other places. And by the time that my father wanted to return back to Brazil, my sister had already been in high school at this point. And if she tried to go back to Brazil, she would have to go back a couple of years. So at that point, unfortunately, there was a separation of the family. My dad went to Brazil. My mom stayed here with us in order for us to finish school, with the eventual plan of going back, but that never quite worked out because things kind of soured out. So my initial journey in the faith was very much Protestant. As I came into the US, my mom initially sought out Episcopalian churches. So we went there. There was a Church of the Apostles over in Falls Church, Virginia, and we used to frequent that church. But then eventually over time, she would work 18, 20-hour days, and she just didn't have the energy, including weekends. And we stopped going, even though my mom has always remained really strong and taught us a lot about the faith, talked about God and so forth. As time went on, I started to fall away more and more from the faith. Still believed that a God existed, but didn't see him as very important at a part of my life, and certainly wasn't really talking to him that much. By the time I was around 16 or 17, my mom was remarried. And my stepfather and I just couldn't quite mesh. It probably was my teenage years and, rebellion and so forth. In my eyes and in my memory, I remember being like, I don't understand what's going on. Why can't you just, why don't you just back off? So anyways, it was becoming an issue to the point that I was afraid that I was going to trigger some kind of separation from them. So I talked to my friend and their parents, and I moved out of the house at around 17 or so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think I almost killed my mom by doing that. But
Mm.
in my eyes, I was trying to save their marriage, and I didn't want to cause any more issues. So I moved out. I was finishing high school, and I tried to start college, but I was trying to work and moving a lot between friends' homes and out of friends' homes, all around in that same area of Virginia. At this point, we were in Fairfax, Virginia, until I picked up a job as a veterinary technician, essentially like an animal nurse. So I did that. It was easy money. I liked medicine, so I figured I would kind of do that for a little while. And my now wife, Rachel, had moved down there for a couple of years to Virginia to be with her sister who was finishing up college. And she started working at the same place. So at this time, if you want, I can kind of go into now, the next stage that finally triggers the conversion, unless you have any kind of questions or things you wanted me to clarify.
Well, your conversion story is we haven't gotten to that part yet, but it certainly sounds like your upbringing was tense, I might say. If you had told me this, the beginnings of your life were like this, and you'd end up as a pediatrician at the end of it, I'd be kind of shocked. I'm curious, with some of your difficulties as a young person, were you kind of craving stability? Did you find yourself craving that as you got older?
That's a good question. As I got older, yes. At the time that I met my wife, no. I was in, it was my late teens, early 20s, and I was still very much in that phase of just wanting to party and and be out, and I wasn't really thinking of any kind of stability. It's true. My life was, when I look back, my life was hectic, but my mom did such a good job of feigning stability. She still came home even though she was exhausted, and still somehow managed to set the table for us and make dinner. Wow. To buy us clothes, and she always made sure that we're wearing really good clothes. She made a lot of effort to kind of make sure that everything looked and seemed stable. So she was able to fake me out for quite a while. So I think even though things were hectic, now that I talk about it, thankfully I felt pretty peaceful inside until those years. Yes, when I had to move out of the house. And there was a lot of bouncing around going on there, but I had a great relationship with my mom still. Like I said, she cried her eyes out when I moved out, and I told her, Mom, this is great. At that time I was planning on going into the Air Force. I was like, Mom, there's another year I'm going to go into the Air Force. This is not a big deal. Let's just make sure that your relationship works out with him and so forth. So, I'm
curious, how did her relationship go with your stepfather?
Well,
didn't quite take.
It didn't quite take. He was a difficult person. So I do realize that part of it was him. I'm sure part of it was me too, because I was a teenager. But it didn't quite work out.
Okay. That was, well, that's good to know then that, at the very least, because I always worry about stuff like when I hear about families with, particularly with where there's a separation and the kids are a little bit older, I know it seems like every conversation I have with someone, the kid always kind of felt like it was partially their fault. And it's good to see that while you may accept that you may have had some responsibility in it, it sounds like it was certainly more than you. Because you seem like, if you want to become a veterinary nurse, that's not the kind of thing that I often think of for a selfish person. That's, as a matter of fact, it sounds very selfless. As a matter of fact, it just sounds like you keep talking about some of the difficulties of your childhood, but then you keep landing yourself in places of great stability. Yeah,
and thank God for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know that I thought about it that way, and perhaps my upbringing, the way that my mom had already taught me, kind of made me seek out those things. I don't know, but it's true. I always did seek to have some sort. You're right. Yeah, stability and responsibility.
Like when you first said, "Oh, I'm gonna drop out. I'm gonna leave the house," and I'm going to join the Air Force. I mean, that's another example of where you're sort of seeking out stability. I think that's, I kind of,
right.
So Kari and I have often talked about the fact that our lives have not gone in the directions we anticipated repeatedly. She is not where she expected to be. I am not where I expected to be. And thank God for that, because I'm much better shape where I am now than what I had originally planned on. And Kari's one that often says this, God knows what he's doing when he sets us on a path, And
I think, if you look back, and it's maybe interesting that you're kind of seeing some of this now from an outside perspective, pointing at it, but that when you look back, it's like, well, that was God's hand working in my life through it all. And also, I look back, and I didn't know this about you, about the Air Force portion, you had just mentioned it now, but that's all serving, like it's serving others. A pediatrician is serving others. In the Air Force, you're serving others. You're laying down your life for others when you're in the military. So
veterinary nurses serving others.
Yeah. I mean, what you've been doing is just service where God has placed you. So, and now of course, as a family man, for your family first, serving them, serving your wife, your children, it's beautiful. It's beautiful to look back and see God weaving that into your life. So
that's true.
If you haven't realized that yet, there you go.
Guys.
Yeah.
That's what we feel our podcast is, an opportunity to help
anybody
others.
else that wants to come on that needs some therapy. Mike and Kari got you.
Hey, listen, I've joked about it before. My job as a PR guy is 90% of my job is listening to other people and helping them through their problems. It's the strangest thing. It's so weird. If I had known that I would be doing this as my professional career, I would have gone into psychotherapy instead. But let's talk a little bit about the conversion. So we've gotten you to your stability. So how do you go from sort of an evangelical background to a stage of your life to sort of weaving your way back into Christianity again?
Yeah. So again, I guess to kind of like lay out the scene at that point, I was working as a vet tech. The group that worked with me at this place were a lot of teenagers and young adults. So we would go to clubs on a regular basis and go to parties and all these things. That's what we did. That's where we used our paychecks. And at that point, I was thinking, I think at some point I want to get married. It was a thought every once in a while. And I was thinking, probably when I'm like 30, 35 or something would be a good time to do that. And so Rachel, my now wife, started working there. And we took interest in each other, just started talking, tried to find, change our schedule so we would work together. We just kind of seemed to mesh. She at that time did not have her faith in the forefront of her mind. She was brought up Catholic by a wonderful family, but had strayed. She was 20 at that point also. And so anyways, we started hanging out first in clubs and all these kinds of things and whatnot, and really began to like each other. I met her parents who were coming down to Macedon, which is a place that is in Virginia, and for skiing and so forth. So I went over there and met them. This was only a month and a half into us knowing each other. And God just hit us so hard that by 3 months after having met each other, we were engaged. Wow. And it wasn't an irresponsible engagement, kind of like, let's do this. Like, let's go to Vegas and get married, It was really something that completely changed our lives. We started out by not caring about future and God and nothing like that. But by the time we got to a month and a half of knowing each other, we were both asking each other, it's like, where is the true faith? Like, is it Protestant church? Is it the Catholic church? We need to figure this out. And I can't explain to you why, except for the fact that, I am certain at this point, it was just the Holy Spirit came in and he had a purpose.
Yeah. That's unusual too. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's unusual. Yeah. I've heard these stories a lot in my past, and almost 9 times out of 10, it's when it's a guy, typically, I met a woman and she brought me back to the faith because her faith was so like hardcore. Right. But here's a moment where the two of you, neither one of you have particularly tangible faith at that time. I mean, I'm sure you were growing up with it. I'm sure it existed in your soul, but it's not your forefront of your mind. What your now wife isn't going to Sunday mass every week, I don't think I've ever heard a story like that where a pair of nuns, NONEs, people without faith, come together and get hit by that spiritual hammer. What was it? Was it the impact of her parents, or was it just like conversations between the two of you?
It wasn't. It was conversations that began to emerge, and that's the great part about it, is like neither of us can take credit for it. It truly was. It had to be the Holy Spirit that just swept in, and he just had a plan for us to come together, and he made sure that he made that aware to us at that moment. Because again, neither Rachel nor I had plans to get married anytime soon. And yet by 3 months, we had such a burning desire to know God more and knew who he was, came out of nowhere, that by 3 months, we're like, we know we're supposed to get married. We know we're supposed to figure this out. And we're going to figure out how to live our lives for God at this point.
At that time, there were people like, you guys are crazy. Like, what are you doing? Like your coworkers and everyone.
So many stories. Yeah, I remember this is a couple of months before I got married to Rachel. So we got married a year and 3 months later, right? After having married each other, after having met each other. And I remember a couple months before getting married, I was trying to just make things right that I had made wrong beforehand, because I had done so many things at that point that I was like, so I remember calling this girl that I used to date, and I told her, I just wanted to let you know that, like, I'm sorry that for anything that I kind of did, that I didn't act the way that I should have acted, that I didn't respect her any way that I should have. And she was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, listen, it's okay if you don't fully understand it, but I just want to say sorry.
I just have to do this for me. Okay.
This is like conversion and 12-step program all at once. This is amazing.
That's right. I figured I really needed to, do my best to make things right. There's one thing to convert, right? And then to say I'm sorry, but then you often leave a lot of damage behind from the sins that you committed. And whatever you can do to fix those things, it's like that broken window that you still have to fix afterwards. Right. You can tell your neighbor sorry, but the window's still broken. So I tried to make those efforts at that time.
That's beautiful. I actually never heard that as part of someone's conversion story, and I too have heard many conversion stories.
Yeah, that's you. Welcome to the firsts club. That's a first that I've never. I think we're going to have your wife on at some point, because I want to hear the other side of this.
That's good.
So,
it'll be like funny. Dan's lying about all of this.
I was a great Catholic. I don't know what he's talking about.
That's right.
Okay. So in addition to you guys meet each other and within months have decided that you're destined for each other. But was the conversion, like, did you guys make a decision to get married in the Catholic faith, and that's where like the conversion emanated from, or what kind of like brought you into those next steps?
Yeah. So we started talking about, where's the true faith? Where is God? Like, what do we do at this point? I was pretty set on not becoming Catholic because again, I thought if I did, I was pretty much sealing my damnation. So I
such a weird thing to hear. I'm sorry, I apologize. That's so strange. I mean, I know there are people out there that believe that. Like my mother came from a Protestant family, and my father was Catholic, and her side of the family were scandalized when she decided to marry a Catholic. But that was in the 50s. Papists were still not particularly like. I'm not entirely certain. A couple of my in-laws on my mother's side of the family weren't Klansmen as well, but. Seriously, we came from the sticks. But it's I mean, I guess coming from that evangelical faith, that evangelical style faith that you came from in Brazil, I guess that is kind of mind blowing that you would consider it.
Yeah. And I mean, when you hear, and this will come up, but when you hear Scott Hahn talking about it, he had a similar kind of like aversion to the Catholic faith. Because he grew up in such a strongly Protestant, but not, it's kind of when you get that Bible church, and you can read the Bible in a way that you interpret it to be the way that you think it is, and the further and further you get from like those elements of truth, you just get so far from understanding. From understanding what Scripture is truly saying. And I mean, no offense to They have a lovely, lively faith. But obviously, as you get further and further from the true magisterium of the church, the more you drift away from your understanding of Scripture, the true understanding of it and things. So, but anyways, so as we started talking about these things, my wife started bringing up her faith, and she's like, "Listen, I think the Catholic faith is true. My mom has talked to me about it. This is how I was brought up," and things started coming back to her. And she's like, "I really think the Pope is the head of the church." I was like, "Rachel, the Pope is the Antichrist. Like, there's no way, So what happened at that point is I said, you know what? I need to go back to the beginning. So I started reading the Church Fathers. And I picked up the books, which I have on the shelf, from Vatican II. And I started reading the documents from Vatican II. And I started listening to Scott Hahn and his conversion too. And as time went on, I was like, oh my goodness, like I think the Catholic Church is actually the church that Jesus founded. What do I do? And then there was a pivotal moment there that Ray invited me to go over, Rachel invited me to go over to the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception down in DC, because we lived right there.
That'll convert you right then and there.
Yeah. So I had a lot of trepidation before walking into there, because to me, that was like the cathedral, where Satan worshipers were going. And, it's the last place that I wanted to step into. So I had a lot of hesitation, but I said, all right, you know what, like I will go and I will look, as long as you're listening to what I have to say also, which she was, so I'll do my part and I'll go in, and that's fair.
Were you guys engaged at this point? Were you engaged at this point, or was it still during the dating period? Okay.
Not yet. That was like the furious storm of like 3 months of us trying to figure some of this stuff out.
Okay.
But when I walked into the Basilica, there was just such an enormous amount of peace that came over me that it was undeniable that God was not in there. Or undeniable that God was there.
Yeah.
So we spent our time there, and after I left, that pretty much sealed it for me, except that I now had to kind of take down my pride and say, all right, how do I deal with the situation? I had a big issue with the Blessed Mother, because again, she's viewed as like the epitome of idolatry by many Protestants, because essentially people feel like we're going to her instead of going to Christ. So I had a hard time, and for quite a while, even after becoming Catholic, I had a hard time with the rosary and so forth. But that was what sealed it for me. And I went into CCD at that point. We knew that we were going to get married then in the Catholic faith. I knew I was going to become Catholic. I just needed to learn more. I was willing to kind of go in and try to figure out why I still felt so horrible about so many of these things. And yet, but I knew that this was the correct path now. I was really blessed to have an amazing CCD instructor, who was Father Edlifson down in St. James Church, down in Falls Church, no longer there, but he was just, very theologically oriented, so grounded in Scripture, and he was able to answer any question I had. He loved to go back to the Church Fathers, which was what I needed to hear. So I went through CCD there. Kari mentioned Alicia, who's Rachel's sister. Her now husband, we had met at around that time too. He decided to jump on board and start going to CCD. He was agnostic, essentially, at that point. And a year after CCD and so forth, we got married. Michael joined the Catholic faith also, and married Alicia a few months after we married. Poor Rachel's parents just got bombarded with those things. And so we started our lives. At that point, we moved to New Jersey, because this is where Rachel's family was. My family was a little bit more scattered at that point, so we didn't have like a central location to be at. And we started our life up in North Jersey, up in Bud Lake, at the Church of St. Michael's, which was just wonderful up there.
Just out of curiosity, what county is that in North Jersey?
That is Morris County.
Morris County.
So my family lives up there.
Yeah.
My sister's in Lake Apacon, like the next town over.
Oh yeah, that's right. We're right there. Lake Kapakong is actually where St. Michael's is,
Yeah.
right? I think so.
I used to go to a retreat house
Netcong,
right there.
Netcong.
I used to go to a retreat house right there in Lake Kapakon as well for my high school retreat. So I'm very fond of that area.
Yeah. So we moved up there. At that point, I had a lot of debt that I had accrued. As a young teenager, I was so irresponsible that I had close to $25,000 in debt, just from spending money because I wasn't really thinking of the future. But money came to us, and we were able to pay that off. So at this point, we were strongly considering joining the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal and becoming missionaries. We wanted to join their mission down in, I forget where it was, if it was Honduras or where they are in Central America. But we had contact with them and so forth. But at the same time, I had this very strong pull towards medicine, just kind of like this nagging feeling inside of me that maybe God was calling me to be a doctor. I had this passion already for medicine and biology and so forth. And my mom kept on talking to me about it. She was like, Daniel, I am pretty sure you're supposed to be a doctor. So I made a deal with God. I said, look, I will reapply to college. At this point, I had been in and out and so forth. And I needed to get into a pre-medicine program. It needed to be a pretty good school and so forth. So I will apply. If I'm accepted, then I will just take that as being that I'm supposed to go down that path. If I'm not, then we're packing our bags and we'll go do missions work. And I was accepted. So I with hesitation went down that path because we were really on fire and ready to go and do missions work.
Yeah.
What was it about the mission work that inspired you so much that you thought about that? You're making these gigantic leaps in your faith. I mean, like monumental leaps that you're not doing anything small. You're going head first, all in on some of these like thoughts that you're having. And your marriage to your engagement to your now wife, your marriage to your wife happened very quickly, and then shortly thereafter, you're thinking about going south of the border and becoming a mission for a very hardcore community of the they don't mess around down there. I'm just curious, what was it the fire of the Holy Spirit that was really burning in you to make these giant leaps?
Yeah, I have to say it was just we wanted simplicity in our lives. We didn't really care. We had just come from a very materialistic life, just kind of immersed in constant material and all of these vain things in life and so forth. And we had realized how much we had been missing out and how much that had tainted us and brought us away from a relationship with God. And we're like, we don't need any of that. Let's just live a simple life. And what's more important and better than just like living a life for God? Like, let's just go do our missions and we'll tell people about him. We'll live simply. We don't need a lot. So that was our thought. And that seemed like the right path. And it seemed easier than anything else to us. I certainly didn't want to truly go down the medicine of the path of medicine because I knew it was hard work. I knew it was back to school, and it was taking me away from my passion at that moment, which was really like to just live for God in the way that I could see living for God. I later grew in maturity to realize that you live for God through so many other means. And by sacrificing your life in such a case, by, saying, fine, I will go down this path and go into medicine. And don't get me wrong, like I love it. I can't imagine doing anything else. I love waking up and going and seeing patients and thinking through these things and so forth. But it was certainly the harder path, and it took me away from the immediate gratification of serving God in a most apparent way.
And maybe that, maybe that was the deal. It was you needed a little more time to cook. So maybe who knows, you may have gone down there and burned out. Whereas here you were sort of forced you literally have chosen the path of servitude. I know people don't tend to think of doctors as servants, but I've been in the health or worked with in the healthcare field long enough to know that that's actually exactly what they are. So just out of curiosity, where did you end up going for pre-med?
So I went to Rutgers, and then after Rutgers, I went to UMDNJ, University of Medicine and Dentistry in New Jersey, which is no longer, it's now Rutgers too. It's all under the same umbrella. So I applied to Rutgers, and then from there, I had to do basically 3 years of undergrad at that point, or 3.5 really, because most of my credits at that point were kind of like dying out.
Were you like the older guy in the classes?
Oh yeah,
all these young. You're looking at your old self, all these party kids and everything else, and you're
That's
like,
right.
I was there, and I am no longer there now. I'm here in school with all of you.
Yeah. And the other thing is, pretty much, it was like a year later, we had Angelina, who's our oldest now. She's 13. But at that time, and that was tough in itself. So we were living now in Bud Lake, there in Morris County, and we found out we were pregnant. So in order to continue school and not go into any debt, we ended up moving in with Rachel's parents, who are just saints. They really should have just like kicked me out and been really upset and so forth. But they were really beginning to kind of understand what we wanted to do and what our path was. So they took us in with open arms. And at that time, they were actually living with their parents, because Rachel's father at that time had lost his job, and was in between the two. So there were a lot of us in one place. It was very difficult. And a baby. It was very difficult. What's that?
Well, okay. So I love stories like this because I was a history major, and I'm big into my family's, genealogy and stuff like that. And I love, these multi-generational households, because the truth of the matter is that's how we used to live. That was the norm, what you're doing. And it was the norm because it was so supportive to the family at large. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, I'm sure in our modern view, that's insane. But the truth of the matter is that was probably the best case scenario for you or for your entire family, for that matter, and her family to have. Everyone sort of together like that. You guys had the benefit of grandparents and great grandparents to look after a newborn.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, granted, if that was my own life, I probably would have killed myself. But
that's wonderful. I look back with fondness, but there were very difficult moments, and I also felt very inadequate at that time, because I felt like I should be providing differently. But looking back, I would not trade that for anything. It was a time of a lot of grace. We would pray the family rosary together at night, the entire house.
Wow.
I laughed with Kari because I would study in the basement with mice and spiders because there was no room. But otherwise it was wonderful. Wake up in the morning, and Angelina got to grow up with her great grandparents who are, so it was good. And as we continued from there, we had more kids. So we had Angelina initially, and then a couple years later, 3 years later, we had Elijah, who's now 10. So we're beginning to kind of accrue some kids. They are getting a little bit more concerned because we don't have a lot of money. I'm going through school with grants and scholarships, and I'm working on the weekends to kind of bring in some money. Rachel still is working up until we have Elijah. And then we decided, crazily enough, that we thought she should stay home rather than, honestly, to pay for their daycare, you end up kind of like using up all the money. So I was accepted into medical school, and in medical school, we had another child, and then residency afterwards, we had another 2 kids. So a total of, for medical school, you go right through undergrad, that's 4 years. And then you have medical school, that's another 4. And then becoming a pediatrician is 3 years. So we went through 11 years of this really tight living, really not knowing where money was coming from and how we were going to make ends meet. Oftentimes we didn't know if we were going to get to pay for gas or to pay for rent, but money always showed up, whether it's money that would just show up in our bank account and we weren't exactly sure where it was coming from, but it was there, or we weren't expecting it, and all of a sudden a grandparent said like, oh, I wanted to give you this. And we're like, why? They're like, I just wanted to give you this. And it's the exact amount that we need. So that's perfect. So God really was faithful, and I wouldn't change that for anything either, because that was a lesson in life of how reliable God is, how he never leaves us, no matter what, whether we thought we were making, oftentimes we were like, we must be making the wrong decision. Like we're living so tight. And yet when I look back now, I feel like whether we were making the right decisions or not at the moment, he used it for really helping us grow in trust and in faith and realizing that he's a caring father. I have to, at this point, make sure, also because we're going to run out of time soon, but make sure that I bring in the Blessed Mother, who again was very difficult for me to come to have a relationship with. But going back, we were married on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. I remember at that time, Rachel almost crying, saying like, man, I can't believe she's willing to share that day with us. Like that's, that's her feast day and she's willing to do that. But then Angelina was also born on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And a few years back when the 33 Days to Morning Glory, I don't know if you guys know what that is, but the
Father Michael
Gately's book, Consecration to Mother Mary. When that came out, Rachel's mother, my mother-in-law, brought it home to us. And the way it works is you're supposed to look in there and kind of find a feast day that's coming up and try to make your consecration so it ends on that feast day. So when we opened it up and we looked and saw which feast day we were going to consecrate ourselves on, it was, again, the Immaculate Heart of Mary. She has been just so incredibly instrumental in helping me come to know and trust in God. And I was telling Kari this the other day, but the other day I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were talking about, general concerns, especially when we're going through the pandemic and there are protests going on. And he was saying, I can trust God a lot. The one issue I have trouble with is when it comes to my kids. Like, I feel like I need to jump in and protect them. I'm not sure I can feel like I can let God protect them. And, and he was saying, obviously this doesn't make sense because I know he will, but that's how I feel. Like, that's where I draw the line. And so I just started talking to him and I didn't even know what I was saying. But I said, have you consecrated yourself to the Blessed Mother? And he was like, no, I haven't yet. And I was telling him, ever since I did, my trust in God rather, has increased tremendously to the point that now I feel like he will take care of everything. And he really is a good father, and he's always there no matter what. And only when I finished saying those words did I realize what I was actually saying, and I was like, oh my goodness, that is so true. Like, it's since my consecration, my trust in God has really changed. So as we are going into Lent, for any converts and also people of the faith, our Blessed Mother is so instrumental in our walk in faith, in our interior life, our growth in prayer, and our trust in God. It seems, again, like if there are any Protestants that listen to this, it seems like she would take the place of God somehow. But that's impossible, right? She has always pointed to Jesus from the wedding feast at Cana to the cross. It's always been about him. And when you go to her, she immediately turns you and faces you towards Jesus. Another saint that I'm really coming to realize has a very similar role is Saint Joseph. And obviously, as we are now in the year of Saint Joseph, he is another one who he points you right back to Jesus. He teaches you how to be, if you're a man, how to be a man, how to be a husband, how to sacrifice yourself, things that we so need to learn how to do now in society. And for women also, he is that guide, that brings you to the Blessed Mother and brings you to Jesus. The Holy Family is complete with the three of them. And I really feel like that's when our spirit, and many saints have said this, that's when our life there, our spiritual life is complete with the three of them, because the two of Mother Mary and Joseph point right back to Jesus, and Jesus points right back to them to help us have that relationship to, again, reorient ourselves back to God. So it's just beautiful. And it's a wonderful year and opportunity that we have, that it's the year of Saint Joseph and we have the start of Lent. It's been a really difficult, year. 2020 was really difficult, and it seems like 2021 is going to be a little testy too. So it's a great time to lean back on him, know that God will provide for absolutely everything, our spiritual life, but also the temporal things that we need.
So true.
Yeah. So that's been our general path. It was great. My mom.
I'm just sitting here dumbfounded. I apologize for
I
interrupting.
told you, Mike. I said he has
this
a
is the most
crazy
amazing conversion story I've ever heard in my entire life. We're about
That's
5
so
minutes
funny.
left of the podcast, and it's everything you've done is so antithetical to how you grew up. I mean, the mere fact that you came from this sort of evangelical background that demonized the Catholic Church and everything that we stand for, and Mary and the saints, and here I've just spent the last 4 minutes hearing from you talk about your devotion to Mary and your appreciation for Saint Joseph. I'm literally going here. I love these stories because I feel that they're rare, but they're great symbols for people whose lives maybe don't need to do the gigantic hurdle that your life did, but maybe just needs to make little hurdles that no matter what the size is, you can, if it's someone like you, where you came from, can be where you are now, then there's no reason why the rest of us can't do that. I mean, who knows, Kari? I may even learn how to say the rosary.
I'm telling you, it's inspiring. That's this came to be because I heard Dan talk at our young adult group and share this story with them, because young adults thrive off of the conversion stories. Well, everyone does, but listen to Mike's reaction. But, we need to hear them to be inspired, especially I find that age group of the later teens and young adults into their 20s, mid-20s. There's a lot of questions that take place then. So when they hear these solid, good conversion stories, it keeps them kind of on track and anchored. And I was sitting there and I texted Mike, we have to have my friend Dan Costa on the show, because it's so inspiring. And I think we all need to hear these things. And honestly, I had no conversion story in my life. I've been a cradle Catholic and kind of just progressed to the age I was at in a normal way, right? Through my young adult years, then into my adult years, and took it into my own. But even when I hear these stories, like something that you said the other night and you said again tonight has stayed with me. And that was about the consecration to Our Lady and then total trust in God. Like that stayed with me. So it doesn't have to, like you said, Mike, affect each person to have a major conversion in their life. But like, where are we at in our lives, and how can we be inspired to grow a deeper relationship with Our Lady, grow stronger towards St. Joseph, especially in this year, or even just deepen ourselves in Lent by hearing somebody else's story. And that's in a sense what our church did, right? The apostles went out and they told their story. That's how our church started. And I think if anything we can gather from this podcast, it's tell your story, share your story with others, share the faith with others, because you don't know who you're going to inspire by just sharing what God has given you with other people. I think that's really important for us to remember from this. So.
You're absolutely right, and Dan, thank you very much for coming on the program.
Thank you so much.
I think we'd be remiss. We only have a few minutes left, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you about what life was like as a physician during COVID. Has it been difficult? Have you been able to sort of hold, in addition to your 5 children and your burgeoning faith, has COVID treated you okay?
Yes, thankfully we have been okay as far as, not having illness and so forth. So that has been fine. The things have definitely changed, even in our practice, the way that we do things, the types of illnesses that we're seeing coming in, a lot of less sick kids because so many people are at home and not going to school.
Yeah.
But it has, what's kind of breaking my heart is that it has really affected kids. We didn't see it initially. It took a good 3 months. And then I started to see like anxiety creeping into even like 5 and 6 year olds, and them beginning to act out more at home, kind of regressing in their behavior. And now a lot of kids that are just, beginning to verbalize it and say like, I really miss my friends. Like I really miss going to school. And the parents are really struggling too, not only with managing their schedules, which is very difficult, especially with the way that the schools have, schools are making alternating schedules and half days, and it changes every week, and then they stop and they go again. And the poor parents are so stressed out and dealing with anxiety too. But I I think that has been a very difficult part. It's also difficult because I am a pediatrician, that the kids like to see your face. They like to see a smile and for you to communicate with them. And so I've had more kids cry in the last 9 months than I've had my entire career. It's just, you get these little babies and they can't see your face and they're so scared, and they haven't seen anyone for months anyways. They forgot that they're like other humans. But, thankfully it's, again, right. Like you mentioned, it's a mission field, and it's a mission of self-sacrifice too. So what we can also do is, when these patients come in, is sit down with them, allow them to kind of de-stress a little bit, for the parents to be able to talk about the things that they're going through and the concerns with the kids. And then reaffirm them in their parenting too, and say hey, you know what? Don't worry, you're doing everything you can. They're going to be totally fine. Yeah, they're struggling now, but we'll kind of get through this. And have that time too, because a lot of the parents, our practice is great. I love it because these parents are like family to us. So they come in and we get to just chat and talk about things and laugh. And it's nice for both of us to kind of have that interaction that we're not getting on a regular basis because of COVID. So God willing, things will progress to the better, and we'll begin to kind of be able to normalize things again soon, for the sake of everyone's mental health too at this point.
Daniel, I got to tell you, thank you very much for coming on the podcast today. It was absolutely illuminating. Your conversion story is unbelievable. I can't wait to share this podcast with people and the show with people, because I think people will be really moved by it. I actually am. The PR guy in me is already thinking up different ways of packaging you for other things that we have going on in the diocese with people that I think would want to hear your story. Mm-hmm. So by all means, thank you very much for coming on. Kari, thank you very much for inviting him on. Of course. Yeah, this is wonderful.
Holy Spirit. Thank you, Holy Spirit.
And I have a sneaking suspicion this will not be the last time you're on our podcast. I have a feeling we may have future questions for you. So we'll invite you back. But
thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, yeah, sure thing.
You're welcome.
And to our listeners, thank you very much for listening today, and we'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
God bless.